back to another episode of the Open Source Cafe. Today we have Ben joining us from Flagsmith, and we're going to talk about flags, more specifically feature flags and continuous operations support systems, around open source, all sorts of things. So before we get started, Ben, would you like to give yourself a quick intro? Tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself since it's your first time on the channel.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hey, Kunal. So my name is Ben Robec. I live in London. I've been working in software engineering for coming up to 30 years now, actually 27 years. Was running a software agency for 20 years in London, and Flagsmith was actually a side project within that company that got traction and took off, and so that's my full-time focus now.
Amazing. And can you share a bit more about your journey? Like how did you come up with the idea of Flagsmith? We'll talk more about the details later, but just your personal story.
Yeah, so we actually used to come up with crazy ideas for side projects in the agency. They were always kind of stupid ideas, or not stupid, but kind of not really commercially viable ideas. So we built a big LED wall with an Arduino and a Raspberry Pi and wrote the software for that. And you could send it memes and it would display on this huge LED wall that we had in our office. And we built a mobile app called Life is Terrible, where you posted pictures. It was kind of the opposite of Instagram. So the idea was you post photos of when your life had gone wrong, and the filters made the pictures look worse. And it was kind of like just to hack around with new technologies and new ideas and like new frameworks and languages and stuff. But then we kind of thought, look, next time we have some free time, let's try and think of an idea that might be commercially viable or might be like a successful open source project. And we put together a set of questions that people in the company could come up with ideas of things to build, and we'd score them based on a number of different criteria, but targeting commercial viability basically. And we had like 6 or 7 ideas floating around. And then Kyle, one of the co-founders, came up with the idea of feature flags. We were looking to use them in the agency and for our client work. And there was only a couple of commercial vendors out there at the time, and they were kind of expensive, and they didn't kind of fit what we wanted. And so we scored all those 6 or 7 ideas, and feature flags was way out in front in terms of the points the total that it got. So that was coupled with the fact that there wasn't really an open source project out there that most tools or most software tools, engineering tools, there's a handful of open source projects out there. You generally can pick from like 3 or 4 decent ones, or commercial open source businesses, or just successful open source projects, and there wasn't really one for feature flags. So we just started building a very sort of simple MVP with a couple of SDKs. Like we were writing stuff in JavaScript, React at the time, and Java. So we wrote a couple of SDKs and open sourced it, and that was the start of the project, really.
Amazing. And for folks who might not be familiar, let's say, with the term, can you maybe give a brief overview on what feature flags are and how does it benefit the software development and the deployment processes?
Yeah, so I mean, they're really simple. Basically, it's just a Boolean. I mean, it's simplest. They're just Boolean things that allow you to control execution flow in your application. So, but you can do it remotely. So the most important thing that feature flags give you is they allow you to separate deploying your software to releasing a feature. Like normally almost always without feature flags, the deployment of the software, so building and releasing a new version of your application, will then immediately release the new features of that version. And what feature flags allow you to do is it allows you to control in a remote way whether a feature is enabled or disabled in your application, basically. So this idea of decoupling deployment from release is the kind of the core value that you get from feature flags. Once you start to use them, there's a bunch of other things that you can leverage with them. So things like driving A/B and multivariate tests, and gradually releasing features to your users, or releasing features to a certain subset of your users, and a bunch of other little techniques as well. But the main value that feature flags give you is the ability to decouple deployment and release. And there's a number of reasons why that's really, really powerful. The most common one is it allows you to test features in production before they go live. It allows you to roll back features without having to worry about redeploying your code or reverting commits in your source code, or doing it, having problems with like rolling back schema versions and things like that. So rollbacks is another core benefit of flags. And it also allows multiple, if you've got multiple teams that are working on an application or a suite of applications that are connected together, it allows you to much more easily coordinate those releases. The actual the main reason that we wanted to use flags within our agency was a story about how we were working with a fairly large organization, and there was a platform that we were working on, and we were like one of 5 teams building parts of this platform. And there was like an interconnected coupling between those teams, and it meant that when we were trying to do a release, so that the company was trying to do releases every 2 weeks. When we tried to do a release, the only way that a release really got executed was if all of those 5 teams were green to go, like they didn't have any blocking issues, tests were passing, maybe some sort of like business aspects were good. And what we saw happening was there was not always, but there was nearly always like 1 or 2 teams who were blocking the release because someone had found a critical issue, or there was some vulnerability, or someone was on holiday that needed to do something important, and it kept pushing these deployments to the point where the application, the platform hadn't been deployed for like 3 months. And we immediately realized and saw that feature flags would be able to really help with that problem, because they allow people to deploy code without kind of lighting it up and making it part of your code path. So that's kind of them at their simplest. But the category, the segment of engineering tools that Flagsmith sits within has kind of become much broader in the last few years. And there's platforms that focus more on experimentation and driving A/B and multivariate tests, and then reporting on that. Doing phase rollouts, doing actual feature management. They're using flags to control like who has access to which features. But the core concept remains the same. It's basically, a Boolean variable in your code that you can manage remotely.
Yeah, and you mentioned about large development teams. So can you maybe share some of the best practices for like if someone wants to implement and manage feature flags effectively when they're dealing with like complex applications and large development teams?
Yeah, so it really depends on what sort of application you're building. Like the feature flags are generally easier to reason with when you deploy them on the front ends of your application, because then you've kind of got, if this feature is enabled, show this button or menu item or tab or whatever. But it's also very common for Flagsmith users to put feature flags into server-side applications as well, and that's where a lot of the power of working with, if you're working in as part of a larger team, can help. So to give you an example, one of the problems that feature flags solve for a lot of our customers, that imagine if they're running like a microservice architecture and they've got, say, like 10 microservices, it can be really difficult if there's coupling between those microservices for whatever reason, like API contract coupling, version coupling. Coordinating the release of a large number of microservices can be really, really challenging. And so, feature flags allow you to sort of like sidestep that problem by, because you've decoupled this deployment from the release, right? So let's say you want to deploy a new API contract for your microservice. So let's say you're changing the API interface. You don't want to go through that hassle of like versioning your API, because that's work to keep the legacy code running and tested and what have you. So what feature flags allow you to do in that situation is build, update the coupled services to work with that new API contract, and then they can just all flick over to the new API version at the same time, because you can very, very easily coordinate the release of that new API contract. So that's a pattern that we see quite a lot with larger teams working on feature flags, and working with Flagsmith. And there's a lot of similar patterns that are kind of that type. But I mean, also we see a lot of customers deploying Flagsmith and then just working across multiple different teams. Like one of the end result of using flags effectively is generally you'll get an increase in development velocity, because you find that your engineering teams don't get blocked by each other or for whatever reason, because a release can't go out. So at a kind of meta level, it can also enable things like sort of single working off a main branch, deploying to a main branch, not like reducing the number of non-production environments in your organization. So we have customers that are running with a single production environment. They do their testing in production using flags to control that testing and to control new features. And so, an increase in the release velocity of larger teams as well. So, it's a tool that allows larger teams. Generally, larger teams release software less frequently, and so using feature flags generally allows those organizations to start increasing their release velocity. So you tend to get this kind of like higher level like process improvement within larger organizations when you're delivering and deploying using feature flags.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing, Ben. And speaking of development processes, what if we talk about, like, in the context of A/B testing, or when you're gradually doing feature rollouts, how do feature flags enable teams to like gather some valuable, let's say, if you want to make any data-driven decisions, so you want to gain, let's say, some user feedback or whatever, in these areas for testing and feature rollouts, how can feature flags help teams?
Yeah, so to give you an example, like they're really, really powerful for doing A/B and multivariate tests as well. So because generally with Flagsmith, you're writing some, let's say you're writing some server-side code and you're writing or working on a new search algorithm. You've got your existing search algorithm and you've got your version 2 search algorithm. And because you've got the Flagsmith SDK running within your server infrastructure, you can add a simple conditional statement to say, like, if this flag is on, if the new search flag is on, then use the version 2 search algorithm. Otherwise, use the existing version 1. And so that, you can then toggle the flag and turn that version 2 search algorithm on or off. But what you can also do with tools like Flagsmith is you can say, I want 50% of my customers to experience version 1 of the algorithm, and I want 50% of my customers to receive version 2. And so Flagsmith, the SDK, then is doing the kind of bucketing part of an A/B test. You can then run, you've got half your customers using version 1, half using version 2, and then Flagsmith allows you to connect and integrate the platform into downstream analytics providers. So, let's say you integrate with say Dynatrace or Amplitude. When someone uses the search algorithm, Flagsmith will say to Dynatrace or Amplitude, right, Ben's session was served a true for the new search algorithm flag. And someone else's might be false, because of this 50-50 bucket. And so once we've applied that like event property to the analytics platform, they can then be responsible for seeing how that search algorithm has affected the behavior of that session. So, people might get to, it might improve the checkout performance, or, people might use the search functionality less frequently because they're getting more valuable results or better results. So that's kind of like a way that you can use feature flags to drive A/B and multivariate tests. And they're also, a lot of A/B testing tools generally, focus on doing cosmetic changes to front-end applications. But because your feature flagging SDK is built into your entire application, it's very easy for you to test any kind of aspect of a new feature, just by doing a percentage split on whether the flag is on or not. So that's one sort of like more advanced way of using flags. And then, like you said, like a second more advanced method is doing phased rollouts of flags. So let's say you're worried that new search algorithm is going to be really computationally expensive, and it's going to, you're worried that it's going to put too much load on your search infrastructure. So what you can do is, instead of saying, right, I want half my customers to get the flag as true and half to get the flag as false, you can say, I want 1% of my customers to get the flag as true. And so you can enable 1% of your customers using the new search version 2, and then look into your infrastructure and make sure that you're happy with the performance of the search engine or whatever it is you're testing. So you can gradually roll out and increase that percentage. And that's kind of, because you're doing all this stuff remotely, it's really, you don't have to redeploy your application. You don't have to stop anything. You don't have to roll anything back. You're literally in the Flagsmith interface saying, right, I want 5% of my customers to get version 2, or, I want 10%. And then if you're happy with the performance of the version 2 of the algorithm, you can just enable it for everybody. And again, you haven't done any deployments or anything like that. You've just turned it on for everybody.
Thanks for sharing, Ben. And also, you mentioned how it helps within teams communication, because communication is a crucial aspect when we work on development projects. One quick question around, do you think what if someone wants to deploy feature flags on premises? Like, is there a scenario which might help like a company to choose this approach, and is there a potential benefit?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, a lot of our customers want to run on premise, right? Like, they might be working in regulated industries like financial services or healthcare, or they might just have like a privacy stance that that states that they want to run the platform themselves on premise. And so Flagsmith's like a commercial open source business. You can download and run the platform in Docker on your laptop. It'll be up and running in like 30 seconds. And you can use that completely free of charge. And you can also deploy that. You can deploy that platform, within your server infrastructure on premise. Most of our customers using Kubernetes to manage those deployments, but it's a very, very simple stack. We have an API and a database, Postgres database, and that's basically all you need to get going. And that architecture can scale up to tens of thousands of requests per second for flags coming in. So yeah, like there's a bunch of benefits of running on premise. Like, yeah, you've got you don't have to worry about being reliant on a third party service to host your flags. But it can also bring a lot of benefits around latency as well. So if you're deploying Flagsmith on premise, co-located alongside the rest of your applications, you don't have to worry about latency, or you have to worry far less about latency, especially in server-side applications, because they don't have this this network hit of having to go out onto the internet and say what are Ben's flags. So yeah, there's a bunch of benefits around running on premise.
Thanks for sharing, Ben. And since we're talking about like with various aspects of software development, one of the crucial ones is security. And you were talking about when you're rolling out new features or changes. So how do feature flags basically address these security concerns if you're introducing a new feature, making any changes?
Yeah, I mean, the best one, the most obvious one is that you can roll that change back really, really quickly, right? Like, if you're, I mean, there's a bunch of different patterns in terms of like running flags, but you can, generally, like if you disable a flag, most of our customers, if you go into Flagsmith and disable a flag, generally like that will immediately affect the change of behavior in that application. So a lot of our larger organizations, they it can take them sometimes hours to get a new release out, right? In the event of a rollback or a problem. And so yeah, like just being able to do a rollback in literally seconds, that can be really valuable too.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. So, security is on the mind of most people when they're trying out a new feature or, stepping into a new domain or yeah, something like that. But since we're talking about, let's say, if we talk about development teams, would they face any challenges if they're managing feature flags across, let's say, if they are working on different platforms like web and mobile and like your server side applications? And maybe, do you think there's any benefit for using a hosted API or like a private cloud to help address these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the benefits of having Flagsmith be an open source product is that you can really host it. You can host it wherever you want and however you like. So we have a SaaS platform. We have like an edge network with 8 different, distribute the data around 8 different regions around the world, and have like we can lose 2 AWS regions and still be serving flags. But yeah, like if you want to host it yourself, you can do that. If you want us to host you a private tenancy, we do that too for a lot of our customers. So there's a lot of flexibility around how those things get deployed. And yeah, we have a lot of success with companies that that just for what a number of different reasons aren't able or willing to rely on a SaaS platform, like a purely SaaS platform, to deliver those flags for them. Yeah.
Agree. Couldn't agree more. Thanks for sharing, Ben. And it was great talking to you. My last question is just for the folks, and development teams who might be watching this session. And I'll follow up with I'll write a blog and all these other things later on. Can you maybe share with them how they can get started today if they want to? And maybe you can share a bit about how they can onboard to Flagsmith as well. And for folks who are listening, I'll leave all the links that Ben shares in the description below so you can check it out.
Yeah, cool. So, well, there's a number of different ways. If you want to, the easiest way is to just, there's two different options. Firstly, you can just run, grab our Docker Compose file and just run Docker Compose up. And, depending on the speed of your network, you'll have an instance of Flagsmith running locally, within a minute. And you can just go ahead and, start creating some projects and environments of Flagsmith, some flags, and then integrate with one of our SDKs. So we've got like 12 different language SDKs, and we support a bunch of different frameworks as well. So more of like the front end frameworks, the JavaScript frameworks. The other option is you can go to our hosted platform. So just go to app.flagsmith.com. We have a completely free tier. You don't need a credit card. You just go on, put your register, and then hit our hosted edge network to do that. So yeah, like the best place to look is docs.flagsmith.com. There's a quick start guide that will walk you through like using the Flagsmith platform and using flags to control the behavior of a simple web page. And then from there, it's just a question of figuring out where in your workflow and your team's workflow it's going to work best. And one of the things that we do talk to customers about as well is you don't have to use it all the time, right? Like sometimes there's no need for it, or it's just not relevant, or it's you don't have to put everything that you're working on behind a new flag. But there's so many, we use the platform itself to deliver flags on deliver features itself. And sometimes it's like we don't need to do it in this instance, but quite often it's like, we really want to see how this works in production against production data, so we'll put stuff behind a flag. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can get started. And as I said, like that Docker Compose file, you can have it running locally, and that will scale up to very, very, very high traffic volumes. If you can put the compute resources behind it too. So yeah, there's a lot of different options there. We also have like a Helm chart for Kubernetes, if that's something that's interesting. We have Terraform scripts to deploy the platform onto AWS and Azure. So there's a whole bunch of options around that. And then if you're interested in hacking on it as well, just github.com/flagsmith, or working on our SDKs, or if you just want to have a look at the code, you can do that on our GitHub pages.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing, Ben. I'll leave all the links in the description below. While you're at it, make sure you give it a GitHub star as well.
Yeah, that would be great.
Community. Check out the community and the documentation and all these other things. I'll be trying it out. I'll use the Helm charts. I'll try spinning it up on Sivo. Thanks for sharing, Ben. And
awesome.
It's great talking to you, folks. Check out the links in the description, and if you want to follow up with the Flagsmith community, I'll leave the links in the description below. If you have any questions, you can leave those in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.